and welcome to Assembly Audible, the podcast where we talk about the technologies, strategies, people, and processes for assembling discrete parts into finished products. One of the topics we're covering this year on the podcast is the facets of automation and advanced manufacturing. Today, we're lucky to have an expert in the area of artificial intelligence. Jousef Murad is an engineer and a well-known content creator with over 100,000 followers. He's based out of the Netherlands, and he's joining us today as we cover artificial intelligence for the first time on Assembly Audible. Where does AI fit into the picture of assembly? Today, we're going to find out. Jousef, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for making time today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm so excited too. I've been following you on LinkedIn. You know, I'm a fan of your content. So I'm really happy to have you on the show. So I guess let's start with, do you mind to give our listeners just, an introduction to your work and your vision or mission?
Cool, sure. So I'm an engineer by training. I studied in Germany, did my bachelor's and master's there, focused mainly on something called the finite element method, which is kind of a structural mechanics area of engineering. And then I delved into numerical computational fluid dynamics, where you kind of simulate fluid flow around fancy objects inside of the computer, and then have to interpret them as an engineer. And then I finished off my studies in artificial intelligence, where I basically created an algorithm that was scanning objects or 3D objects inside of Blender and would classify them, for example, like a shaft or a turbocharger, something like that. And then while I was studying, I was working for a company called SimScale, who was very well known in the simulation space. And now I work full-time for a company called Monolith, who do AI in engineering or for engineers, basically. And our mantra is by engineers for engineers. And on the side, I'm working on a YouTube channel. I have a podcast. I do LinkedIn content creation, Twitter, and I work on my own agency. It's called Apex, which basically enables people or tech companies actually to get more out of their marketing. So basically all the learnings that I've accumulated over the years, being an engineer in the marketing space, to basically apply that knowledge and being a marketer with an engineering background or an engineer with a marketing background, however you want to call it. Basically, artificial intelligence maps input to output. Sounds super fancy, but on a mathematical level, it's basically doing function approximation. So basically, it's kind of predicting something exactly. So basically, once AI has learned from that data, for example, I give it an input, and then I have a predicted output. For example, what we say is something called supervised learning. It's one of the areas of artificial intelligence. There's a lot more, like unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, deep learning, and all these things. But let's maybe stick with supervised learning for a second. You probably have seen predicting cat images. Is that image a cat or a dog? And this is something where supervised learning comes in. So you give it a label set. It's basically how we learn in school. So a teacher tells you something. What's 3 times 3? 9. So basically you learn by repetition.
Yeah.
And this is why you give that AI algorithms a lot of data. It learns from it and basically dissects the image into mathematical operations, ones and zeros. This is basically what it all comes down to. And there's some kind of fancy mathematics, matrix multiplications. And then from that, it learns this is a cat or this is not a cat or basically a dog. And then what we can do is we tell the algorithm, by the way, and now basically playing like domino. What is this? Is this a cat or a dog? And then basically the AI algorithm has to guess, is this a cat or a dog with some accuracy. It's basically a measurement of how accurate the algorithm is. So is it 97% accurate? Is it 99% accurate? But most of the time, this accuracy doesn't actually mean that the algorithm is good enough, especially in safety critical applications. For example, if you have an AI model which is being deployed in aerospace, you wouldn't probably only rely on an accuracy metric. You probably do some validation, some verification tests to make sure it's not targeting civilians, for example, or anything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is basically this input-output relationship. And then what you can do with it is apply it to a variety of problems. We have regression tasks, we have classification tasks, we have clustering, we have recommendation systems. For example, if you watch a movie on Netflix and you watch a specific type of movie more often, the algorithm would understand, maybe Jennifer likes this type of genre very well. So I will keep recommending her that type of video. This is also AI. Amazon is using the same thing.
Okay.
So people who bought this also bought this. Would you be interested in X, Y, Z? This is also AI behind the scenes. So
Interesting.
there's a ton of applications. But what's very important, especially for the listeners, is do you have the right type of data available? Because it could be image data, sensor data, tabular data, which sometimes is the same. So sensor data and tabular data. Is it 3D data? something very complicated in engineering. For example, the example that I gave you with manufacturing, this would be, for example, a 3D problem for AI. This is something that's not very trivial, and this is something Monolith is working on, and they even have a patent on that. So you give it 3D geometries, and it would actually predict if something is manufacturable or not. And even to make it even more specific, imagine you have an electric vehicle, a Tesla, for example. You put the Tesla in a wind tunnel, and then you can kind of predict how much drag, so basically aerodynamic resistance that car has. And depending on how much wheels, sometimes they have like fancy looking wheels, and this is done on purpose. So to reduce basically aerodynamic drag and increase the range of that electric vehicle. What you can do with AI is it generates new designs for that rim and basically tells you, I think, or I know that drag coefficient before even going to the wind tunnel is going to be 0.26 or 0.25. And then engineers, without going to the wind tunnel, which costs like tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars per week, can just look at that tool telling them, okay, the drag coefficient is going to be this, and then, okay, I'm probably not going to test that rim, or I'm specifically going to test that rim in the wind tunnel. This is just a few examples I gave, but it's really exciting.
Yeah. So like maybe the most revolutionary application of AI happens in the like preparatory or research phase. Is that a correct assumption based on what you just said?
You could say so, but even something as simple as like a voice recognition or like Siri. I hope my iPhone doesn't go off now. This is something very revolutionary because behind the scenes, it's like simple AI algorithms, but researchers have worked on that for years, like even 30, 40 years ago. It's just mind-blowing that especially on such a smartphone, you can just deploy an AI model, which is very tiny, and it could just recognize your voice and find things or like basically recognize what words you're saying to that phone. Is just mind-blowing, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. How does artificial intelligence fit into the picture of like manufacturing and assembling goods?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence. I happen to be surrounded by genius or brilliant minds who work on artificial intelligence. I have a little bit of an understanding of AI for sure. So what's happening in the space? What can we do, for example, as engineers, or maybe in the manufacturing space with artificial intelligence? So one example that, for example, Monolith has worked on in the past is something what we call in AI a classification problem. So basically the question would be, is it manufacturable or is it not manufacturable? That would be a classification problem. Or is an email spam or is it not spam? Because you basically classify it into two categories mostly, like yes or no, or is it spam or is it not spam? So when it comes to engineering applications, for example, for manufacturing processes, what you can imagine is, let's say you have a car and you want to stamp a metal piece for that car. Sometimes it's not really clear if a piece is manufacturable. So this is where artificial intelligence can be very helpful. Usually we distinguish between two different areas. One, we have the data-driven approach, which is basically artificial intelligence, because data is the lifeblood of these algorithms that we're using on a day-to-day basis, whether that's voice recognition or what we all heard about ChatGPT. This is also artificial intelligence, where data is very important. So on one hand, we have data-driven methods, which is AI. On the other hand, we have physics-based approaches, which is, for example, something I alluded to, such as finite element method, computational fluid dynamics, or other simulation methods that engineers can use on a day-to-day basis. And most of the time, we have gone from punch cards back in the 50s, 60s, now to really powerful computers that basically democratize the use of physics-based methods, which basically means you can run simulations on the cloud. So engineers don't need super powerful workstations anymore, but you can just send your job to AWS or Azure, calculate your results there, and get back the results and basically interpret them. The big problem, however, though, is that physics-based approaches still are sometimes very tedious to set up. It's sometimes very cost-intensive, time-intensive, and under mounting time to market pressure, especially if like the management level listens to this podcast, they probably know you have time to market pressure. You want to create better products because the consumer want better products over time. So it's really crucial to have the right tools in the right stages of the product development process. And for manufacturing, for example, in the automotive space, when you, for example, stamp a metal part, you can basically with AI detect, is that part manufacturable or not? And if it's not manufacturable, the engineer can basically in a split second see or make a decision, well, I have to maybe tweak a few parameters here and there, however they are called at the moment, doesn't really matter right now. And with AI, they can basically enhance their own capabilities. And what I always love to say is, because everyone is afraid now that ChatGPT will ruin our jobs and marketers won't have a job anymore, it's basically the synergy of AI and human beings is, I think, the most powerful application. So it's not only AI, because AI without any smart data is just dumb AI. So basically, humans plus AI is going to be the most powerful thing that humans will use in the future. So the synergy is important.
The synergy, is that what you would call like Industry 5.0, or is there a name for that?
Maybe. There's probably thousands of names already for it outside, but
yeah,
I think I wouldn't call it Industry 5.0. Maybe it's just the synergy between AI and humans, if you want, or the AI revolution, where humans play a huge role in it.
Okay, that's cool. So how much AI is that the right way to say it, or how is it currently being used? Do you think that a lot of manufacturers are utilizing artificial intelligence, or are we still kind of far away from that point?
Very good question. So I don't have explicit data on that. So I didn't do any research before the podcast, but what I can really tell you is that I think, please don't quote me on this, I believe since the 2000s, from the Fortune 500 companies, around 51 or 52% basically don't exist anymore. It's basically because they haven't adopted these disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And that goes through aerospace defense, automotive, industrial applications. So what we see is that a lot of companies still are a bit hesitant to adopt these AI technologies. For example, maybe the management level says, well, why would we need AI in the first place? It's not gonna, we still can keep our competition away if we just use our classical simulation methods, for example. But really the point is, and this is really something I want to emphasize on, is we talked about data. And sometimes these companies, especially manufacturing companies, they use sensor data. And when we talk Industry 4.0 and IoT and whatnot, they have a ton of data laying somewhere, if they're very lucky, in a data lake or maybe on the hard drives. But most of the time, this data is not being utilized. So it's sitting around somewhere and nobody's ever looking at the data again. So it's basically garbage. But now AI comes in, takes that data from the past and can basically find input-output relationships, what we call, and basically find knowledge or extract knowledge that engineers left in that data, and basically does kind of a pattern recognition task. And with that, with old data or data that you're currently producing, you can use AI to basically leverage existing data or past data to gain that competitive edge over your competitors.
Okay. So is that sort of a piece of advice that you would give maybe to our listeners of how they could get started?
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say AI is a magic pill. It's more like a supplement. So basically, if you know the business outcome, if you have the right data available, and if you have the proper algorithms in place, you can definitely, basically these 3 points, you can basically, the synergy of those, you can basically achieve really cool things with it. It's not going to make you a billionaire for sure. It's not the magic pill, but it's definitely going to give you that edge over competitors and make sure you can deploy AI in the correct way. Because most of the time when we see ChatGPT and all these other fancy applications that are being built, sometimes people who are not in that AI space think, or AI can do incredible things. It's this artificial general intelligence we always see in television, like Terminator, it's going to destroy us all, it's going to kill everybody. So that's most likely not going to happen. So basically what we deal with is artificial narrow intelligence. So being very, very good at a specific niche. But where it's very good, you have to use it as a business. If you don't use it, maybe your competitor will use it, and then this is where they gain the competitive advantage.
Interesting. So what are some of the current constraints or misconceptions about artificial intelligence? I'm sure there's a lot, right?
Definitely. So one of the misconceptions I just mentioned, so this Terminator scenario that everyone is thinking about, whether you're a copywriter or a marketer, yes, the tools might substitute you at some point, depending on the management and so on. But actually, if you know how to use these tools, this is the best thing you can do. So if you're a marketer, an engineer, or whatever, make sure you take some courses online, and then you can basically upskill yourself in learning more about artificial intelligence. Another misconception is probably that you don't need a lot of data, or maybe need a lot of data. So there's two camps. So one camp thinks, I don't need data at all, I have garbage data. But then this kind of mantra kicks in, garbage in equals garbage out. So if your data is garbage, AI learns from garbage. So basically the output is garbage.
Yeah.
And you don't need a ton of data. For example, I think ChatGPT now used 175 million parameters to actually train that model. But this also gives people the misconception of, I need terabytes and petabytes of data to actually train my own model, which is not the case. So sometimes you don't even need a few data points, 30, 50, maybe 100 data points, depending on the problem, obviously. where you can first start to reap the benefits of artificial intelligence.
Here's a random question since we're going over a little bit. What is ChatGPT and why is everybody talking about it?
Yeah. So ChatGPT is basically this generative pre-trained transformer model. It's like, this is what GPT stands for. And it's basically a huge language model that OpenAI, a company, has trained their model on. So tons of data, billions of documents and words and whatnot. And basically what it is, you log into ChatGPT and you give it, especially for marketers, it might be relevant, or for coders, you give it this piece of code and say this code has an error. And then ChatGPT would actually recognize, hey, fix that part of the code. Or maybe you want to do copywriting.
Oh.
Or even for this podcast, you could say, I'm interviewing Jousef Murad on artificial intelligence. Give me 10 questions. And it would basically list all 10 questions prepared for you, and then you can just use it, which is, I think, super cool.
Cool. But I can kind of also see why people think that, like, I don't know, the stereotypical stuff of like, it could be dangerous or whatever. I could see how people would think that.
Definitely.
Yeah, people could get lazy, I guess.
That's one of the problems. I think especially students, when they know about the tool, they are more and more going to use it as like, yeah, I handed in my essay and got like an A on it, but I basically did like 99% of the work was done by ChatGPT. So
yeah.
So I wouldn't 100% rely on AI. So it's basically always the synergy between the engineering knowledge, or like the person's knowledge, plus artificial intelligence, whether that's marketing, coding, mechanical engineering. You should always, at least for now, rely on a human being to counter check if the results are fine and you can actually go and deploy it into the real world. And this brings us to the problem of ethics in AI and biases in AI. So is it actually preferring white people over black people, all these kind of things, especially when it comes to jurisdiction. And there's also an excellent documentary on Netflix on that. I've kind of forgot the name now, where it talks about biases. So if you train the AI model based mostly on white people data, I wouldn't know anything about black people. So
yeah.
It's very critical.
That's interesting. All right. So no one has talked about this specific topic on our podcast yet. So what do you think our listeners should know?
If I would give a piece of advice, I would say just keep investing in yourself. It's just a general advice, whether it's AI or a skill that you're working on. I think today it's very easy to go online and take a class in marketing, engineering, system identification, AI. This is something I would recommend. So basically enhance your own skills and make sure you're not basically don't stop learning is my advice. Because those who will learn how to use AI, they will have the competitive advantage over you. So this would be my piece of advice for whatever that's worth. So
what one more kind of piece of advice question. What advice would you give for to manufacturers who are looking to hire engineers?
I think if you hire an engineer, they should have a variety of skills. So it's probably going to be too long in the podcast, but especially if it goes, or is it about artificial intelligence, I think they should have knowledge in artificial intelligence, a little bit of coding experience for sure, to make sure they can prototype things quickly in case they need to code something up very quickly, but also know if they want to deploy AI technologies, to make sure that the engineer, who is actually the domain expert, knows how to use these AI techniques. Because most of the time, companies will hire data scientists. And the problem with that is data scientists are not engineers. So that means they have to first train a data scientist to tell them, hey, by the way, if you create a spoiler for a car, there's this kind of trade-off between the drag coefficient and actually the force on that car. This is something, a physical intuition basically is something a data scientist usually doesn't have. This is what engineers have. So basically combining their physical knowledge, their domain expertise, and artificial intelligence is, I think, very, very crucial. So if you want them to, or if you want your company to jump on that AI hype train, you definitely should make sure to look out for engineers that are well-versed or like know how to deal with artificial intelligence.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I saw on your LinkedIn page, it says that you focus, one area of focus for you is solopreneurship. Did I say that right? Solopreneurship.
That's correct.
What's that?
Yeah. It's basically, there's this whole movement around entrepreneurship. It's basically starting your own company, escaping the 9 to 5, the whole gibberish that everyone is talking about, basically trying to sell your course. For me, it's always important to, especially after COVID, not only after COVID, but what happened before, to find ways to earn $1, at least $1 online. This, I think, something everyone should strive for. So whether that's creating your own online course or whether that's selling a specific service or consultancy, I think, especially nowadays, it's very easy to make money online. I'm not saying money is the only thing you should care about. It's just basically to find alternative income streams, to basically diversify your income streams. Because sometimes if you rely on your 9 to 5, how some people like to call it, sometimes that could just backfire and you have no other option. So starting early with a side hustle is, I think, a perfect way to not be too dependent on one single source of income. This is what this whole mantra or this thing is all about.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's great advice. I guess one other question kind of just randomly is, how did you get so many followers on LinkedIn? I digress.
Consistency is the solution.
Consistency.
It's basically the answer.
Yeah. You post a lot.
I've been doing this for 3 years now. I mean, if I've been doing the same thing on YouTube, I would probably also have the 100K, 150K, which I'm trying to do at the moment, do at least 1 or 2 videos on YouTube and see how I grow in 1 year. My goal is to have like 50K, 60K on YouTube by the end of 2023. So basically what it all comes down to, whatever system you hear about and people want to sell you a course on how to get reach and modify your content with AI, it comes down to consistency. If you do one thing well enough for like an extended period of time, you will eventually become successful or like, but at the end of the day, it's just numbers.
Yeah.
It's just numbers.
I was just going to ask you, do you apply, like, I know you talk about being science minded or like having an engineer mind. Do you apply those skills to your content creation and social media work?
Sometimes I use ChatGPT when it comes to just idea generation, but most of the time I'm working on systems which you could potentially sell as a course, whatever, systems to automate these processes. So you would post 2-3 times a day and it's all automated. I spend maybe 2 hours a week and then would basically just post for me on several platforms, mix the content a little bit, mix a type of content, whether it's like a video, image, a question, engage people, to also have that, how would you call it? Maybe that social bond with your followers. Because most of the time I see a lot of accounts that just post something and the people don't really have that interpersonal connection with that person who's posting, and they have over 1 million followers, which I don't like. I want to be interactive with people, help them out. And this is actually, I think, what you asked early on in the podcast, like, what is the purpose? So basically my purpose is just to help people, or basically be the one I wish I would have had when I was younger, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's helping people.
And I feel like people like you are kind of like making science cool, you know?
Yeah.
And that's refreshing. You know, I mean, it's better than, you know, people worshiping fashion brands or whatever, you know. Definitely. At least people, you know, there's a place for people who have a desire to learn, you know. So I kind of think that more companies should take the approach that you take, you know, and have like an ambassador or whatever, and create interesting content and, you know, develop their audience that way. But anyways, well, okay. Thanks for, you know, going on a little bit and letting me ask a few more questions. I appreciate it.
Definitely. And I think also what you mentioned, just maybe to wrap it up, is I see a lot of companies now jumping on that train of like, we want to work with influencers, like myself, for example, because they can see the education system is still too outdated. They're basically just generating workforces, and it has to be more entertaining. Like, how do you learn science? By making it entertaining and just educating people. So yeah, let's see what the future brings. I'm trying to do my best to make the world a better place, at least for some people, make it a bit fun, interesting, and hope people enjoy it.
I think you're doing a great job.
I hope people could take away something from it. If you have any questions about AI, maybe you want to deploy your own AI solution in your company, or maybe you want to work with a marketer in the tech space, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer your DMs on LinkedIn.
Okay. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Assembly Audible. For more insights on assembling discrete parts into finished products and the people behind it all, visit our website, assemblymag.com. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast to keep up with our latest episodes. We're also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, so we invite you to follow us there too. This has been Assembly Audible. Thanks for listening.